History doesn't always play fair with its biggest visionaries. Imagine being the guy who looks decades into the future, completely redesigns your entire nation's economy and military, and basically saves your country from being wiped off the map by foreign empires. Your reward for all that? A sudden, totally unexplained execution. Welcome to this explainer on the life of Oguri Tadamasa, the brilliant architect of modern Japan.
So picture this. It's 1868. Japan is in absolute chaos. A brand new government has just forcibly taken power from the old samurai regime. Up in this incredibly quiet rural mountain village, a loyal knight of the old government is just living peacefully in retirement. Then, suddenly, armed soldiers from the new regime show up. They surround him, drag him down to a riverbank, and without a single question, without a courtroom, without a trial of any kind, they execute him. Why? What made this one retired guy so incredibly dangerous that they couldn't even risk putting him on trial?
Well, there's this wild, almost cinematic legend about that exact moment. It's said that right before the executioner's sword actually fell, Oguri looked up, smiled this perfectly calm smile, and pulled a single, ordinary iron screw out of his mouth. Now, historians still debate if that literally happened, but honestly, that tiny piece of metal is the perfect symbol for his entire life. It represented the massive, mechanical, industrialized future he wanted for Japan. But to really understand why a screw was such a big deal, we gotta go back in time.
Let's hit rewind and jump back 8 years to 1860. This was the exact moment this forward-thinking samurai took a massive journey across the Pacific Ocean, a trip that would completely rewrite the destiny of his country. Part 1, Samurai Goes to Iron Country. Okay, so for over 200 years, Japan was totally locked down in self-imposed isolation. Nobody went in, nobody came out. But in 1860, Japan finally sent its very first official diplomatic embassy to America. And walking right there among these traditional samurai wearing their traditional robes was a young, insanely sharp official named Oguri Tadamasa. The sheer visual shock this guy must have experienced is just mind-blowing. Imagine coming from a society built entirely out of wood and paper, where the military is just guys running around with swords. And then, boom, you step off a boat into 1860s America. He's looking at massive steam-powered factories, shipyards pumping out giant warships, railways cutting right through the landscape. It was literally like stepping into a different century.
But here's the thing. Oguri wasn't scared. He just confidently navigated this totally alien world. The Americans were actually deeply impressed by him. He even met with the US president at the White House. The New York Times wrote an article about him, specifically calling out how observant he was. Oguri looked around and instantly realized a terrifying truth. The technological gap between America and Japan was huge. If Japan didn't catch up and fast, they were going to get colonized and crushed by Western empires.
And this really shows you how his brain worked. He didn't just stare at the shiny new trains and say, wow, cool. He looked under the hood of the American economy. He meticulously studied how Western corporations and joint stock companies were actually built, because he realized you can't have modern technology without modern money. That exact research inspired him to go back home and create Japan's very first joint stock company.
When the diplomatic mission wrapped up, the other samurai were out buying traditional souvenirs. But Oguri? He brought back something totally different, an iron screw. He looked at that little piece of metal and knew, if we want to save Japan, we can't just buy weapons from the West. We have to learn how to make the screw, the engine, the ship. We literally have to become a nation of iron.
Part 2, Building Japan's Future. So, Oguri gets back to Japan and just skyrockets through the ranks of the old samurai government. He basically becomes the equivalent of a modern finance minister. But the situation he inherits is an absolute nightmare. The government is completely broke, and he's facing massive, angry opposition from traditionalists who absolutely despise Western modernization.
But Oguri just pushes right through it, moving forward with his absolute masterpiece, the Yokosuka Ironworks. He partners up with these elite French engineers and lays down the blueprints for a colossal, steam-powered shipyard just outside of Tokyo. And this wasn't just some dock to park boats. It was a massive, comprehensive factory built to be the very foundation of a completely modern Japanese navy.
Now, to pay for this insanely expensive project, Oguri was absolutely ruthless. He slashed traditional government waste and those ancient samurai stipends. And he didn't just import French machines, he imported modern corporate culture.
He swapped out yearly rice payments for modern monthly salaries. He brought in strict working hours tied to a clock and Western-style bookkeeping. He was literally dragging Japan's workforce, kicking and screaming, into the modern era.
Naturally, his enemies in the government were furious. They were screaming at him, "The shogun's government is basically collapsing. Why are you blowing all our money on a giant shipyard?" And his reply is honestly one of the most profound things ever said in Japanese history. He told them, "Even if our government falls, whoever takes over will buy a house with a solid storehouse attached." That right there is the whole point. He wasn't trying to save his boss's job. He was trying to save Japan.
And he didn't just stop at the economy. He completely flipped the military upside down. Oguri realized that a tiny, elite club of guys with swords stood zero chance in a modern war. So he took the incredibly radical step of abolishing samurai-only armies. He started collecting military taxes, drafting everyday commoners, like farmers and merchants, and armed them with modern French rifles and tactics.
And the crazy part? His brilliant reforms were actually working. The factories were going up, the army was getting noticeably stronger. But he was a genius who was totally running out of time. The political tension in Japan had finally hit a boiling point. The old samurai regime was completely crumbling, and a massive, bloody civil war was right on the horizon.
Part 3. End of the Shogunate and Loyalty. By 1868, the pot finally boiled over. The Boshin Civil War erupted. A brand new government army, backed by rival domains, started marching straight for the capital to violently overthrow the shogunate that had ruled for centuries. The whole nation just held its breath. Now, Oguri was absolutely not going down without a fight. He came up with this highly calculated, brilliant military strategy. He wanted to use their new French-trained army to block the mountain passes, and at the exact same time, send their brand new steam-powered navy into Suruga Bay to blast the invading forces from the coastline. It was a complete trap, an absolute masterclass in modern warfare. The tension in the shogun's war room must have been suffocating. Will the top boss, the shogun, authorize this devastating ambush, or is he going to fold? Well, ultimately, he rejects Oguri's plan. He chooses total surrender, basically hoping to avoid burning the capital to the ground in a brutal civil war. Because he pushed so hard to fight, Oguri was instantly fired from his post. But, staying fiercely loyal right up to the end, he refused to switch sides or compromise his beliefs. He just packed up his things, left the capital, and quietly retired out to a rural mountain village, fully intending to just live out the rest of his days in peace.
But here is where the tragedy really sets in. The leaders of this new government, they knew exactly who Oguri was. They knew he wasn't just some loyalist. He was the smartest guy in the room, and they were terrified of him. They knew that even sitting in total silence, a mind that brilliant could easily organize a massive, modernized rebellion. To them, he was just way too dangerous to be left alive.
Part 4. Guiltless Death and Eternal Legacy. Which brings us right back to that opening scene. The new government forces march straight into his quiet village, drag him down to the riverbank, and bypass the law entirely. No trial, no chance to speak. They eliminated the very man who had built the foundation they were about to stand on.
Oguri Tadamasa was executed at that riverbank. He was only 42 years old. Just let that sink in for a second. At 42, the brightest mind in the entire nation, a man who literally saw the future, was senselessly cut down. For decades after he died, the official history books of the new government branded him a traitor, this horrible villain of the old regime. But you know what they did behind closed doors? The new government secretly took every single one of Oguri's blueprints, the shipyard, the corporate structures, the military draft, and they copied them. Exactly. The so-called traitor was actually the father of modern Japan.
But you know, history eventually demands the truth. Decades later, Japan completely shocked the world by defeating a major Western power in the Russo-Japanese War. After that monumental victory, Japan's greatest naval hero, Admiral Togo, quietly tracked down Oguri's surviving family, and he looked at them and said, "We won because of the shipyard Mr. Oguri built for us." The truth couldn't be hidden anymore. Oguri Tadamasa was denied his life, and for a really long time he was denied his honor. But his solid storehouse, it survived him. It went on to build the modern nation of Japan. And it leaves us with this really fascinating thought to ponder. Does a true hero design the future, even knowing they might never live to see it? Next time you see an iron screw, maybe you'll think of the samurai who used one to build an entire nation. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning history.